The Roman world is often remembered for its marble temples, busy forums, and wide roads stretching across the empire. But behind those grand images lay quieter questions, questions of daily life. One of the simplest, yet most important, was this: how did people keep warm when winter came? Hello, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we will step into Roman houses, villas, and bathhouses to see how families endured the cold months. From small clay braziers glowing in the corner of a kitchen, to the great hypocausts beneath the floors of wealthy villas. Warmth was a challenge answered with ingenuity. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, so you never miss another calm journey into the everyday past. When we imagine Rome, we often picture bright sunlight, olive groves, and bustling markets under blue skies. Yet the Roman world stretched far beyond the mild winters of Italy. The empire reached into the damp, foggy lands of Britain, the snowy mountains of the Alps, and the cold plains of northern Europe. Even in the city of Rome itself, winter could bring chilly rains, frost, and biting winds that crept through marble colonnades and stone streets. For millions of people across the empire, warmth in winter was not a luxury. It was a daily necessity. The experience of winter differed depending on where one lived. In the Mediterranean heartlands, winter meant dampness, sudden storms, and nights cold enough to make breath mist in the air. In the provinces further north, it was harsher, snow covering roads, rivers freezing, and fields lying silent under frost. Roman soldiers stationed on the frontiers knew well how bitter the cold could be, and families in towns like Londinium or along the Rhine needed real solutions to survive. Yet even in milder regions, the chill of stone houses with open courtyards meant that warmth could not be taken for granted. Roman homes, for all their beauty, were not naturally warm. Villas and townhouses were built of stone, brick, and concrete, materials that lasted but did not insulate. Roofs were often tiled, courtyards lay open to the sky, and windows, when present at all, were unglazed, covered only by shutters or thin cloth. In such spaces, the cold crept in easily. Families wrapped themselves in wool, cloaks were kept close at hand, and fires became the heart of winter life. The very structure of Roman architecture shaped the problem: how to bring comfort into rooms designed more for air and light than for warmth. For the poor, the struggle was most immediate. In the crowded insulae or apartment buildings, families lived in small, drafty rooms. Smoke from braziers stained the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of burning charcoal. Firewood was costly, and charcoal even more so. Many made do with little, huddling together under blankets, layering tunics, and relying on the body heat of family. Winter in such spaces was a season of endurance, where warmth was precious and carefully rationed. For the wealthy, the problem was answered with innovation. Villas in colder regions often had hypocaust systems, underfloor heating that carried warm air through spaces beneath the floors and into the walls. These systems required slaves to tend furnaces constantly, feeding them with wood to keep air circulating. When functioning well, they transformed stone rooms into warm sanctuaries, allowing owners to sit in comfort even as frost covered the fields outside. Yet such systems were expensive, rare, and far from universal. Most households, rich or poor, depended on simpler solutions: braziers glowing with coals, thick woolen cloaks, and fires burning steadily in kitchens. The need for warmth shaped daily routines. Families gathered where fires burned, often in kitchens or small side rooms where heat could be contained. Large atriums and reception halls might be grand, but in winter they stood cold and echoing. It was in the smaller, humbler rooms that daily life unfolded, with the glow of coals lighting conversations and meals. The rhythm of winter was slower, with people lingering near fires, weaving cloth, preparing food, or simply sitting close together. Warmth was not only physical but social, a product of gathering bodies as well as glowing embers. This daily need for warmth also left its trace in Roman writings. Poets complained of the cold winds that cut through cloaks, or of fingers too stiff to hold pens. Letters from soldiers in the provinces asked for warm clothing to be sent from home. Writers described snow falling on city streets, or the bitter chill of mountain passes. All these voices remind us that winter was a living reality, not only for peasants and soldiers, but for the entire empire. Thus, in the first moments of our journey into Roman winters, we see clearly the challenge that lay before every household: stone walls without insulation, long nights of damp or frost, and the constant question of how to keep families safe and comfortable. From the humblest apartment in Rome to the finest villa in Gaul, the answer was the same. Warmth had to be created, preserved, and shared. And in this effort, the ingenuity of the Romans found many forms, from simple braziers to complex systems, from woolen cloaks to underfloor fires. When Romans faced the cold of winter, one truth remained constant. No matter the size of the house or the wealth of its owner, warmth depended on fuel. Wood and charcoal were the lifeblood of Roman heating. They fed braziers, kindled ovens, drove the hypocausts beneath villas, and filled kitchens with steady flames. Without fuel, the finest villa became as cold as a soldier's tent, and the humblest apartment grew dangerous to those inside. To understand how Romans kept their homes warm, one must first understand their relationship with firewood, charcoal, and the endless effort to gather, buy, and use these fuels wisely. Wood was the most basic source of heat. In rural areas, families gathered it from nearby forests, hedgerows, or even orchards. Oak, ash, and pine were valued, each with its own burning qualities. Oak gave long, steady heat. Pine burned faster, crackling brightly. Ash was easy to split and left little smoke. The work of gathering wood was constant. Men, women, and children cut branches, split logs, and stacked them to dry. Piles of firewood stood outside houses, a visible measure of security against the cold months. The sight of a dwindling woodpile brought anxiety, for once it was gone, the only warmth left was in blankets and cloaks. In cities, firewood was harder to obtain. Rome itself consumed vast amounts of fuel, not only for heating, but also for cooking, baking, and industry. Supplies were brought in by cart, by river, or by ship. Merchants sold bundles of wood in marketplaces, their prices rising in winter when demand grew high. For poor families, even small amounts of wood could be costly. Many turned instead to cheaper materials: brushwood, straw, or dung, all of which burned poorly but gave at least a little warmth. The wealthy, however, could afford to buy large stocks, filling storerooms with logs to feed their hearths and hypocausts. Charcoal offered a more efficient, though more expensive, alternative. Made by slowly burning wood in low oxygen conditions, charcoal burned hotter and cleaner than raw logs. It was particularly useful indoors, in braziers that heated rooms without filling them with thick smoke. Yet charcoal carried its own risks. Burning it in enclosed spaces could release deadly fumes, a danger known even to the Romans. Writers warned of accidents, of families overcome by invisible smoke, of the need to keep rooms ventilated. Despite this, charcoal remained central to daily life, for it was the only way to bring manageable heat into stone-built rooms with no chimneys. The use of fuel shaped the layout of Roman houses. Kitchens were designed with hearths that consumed wood steadily, producing heat for both cooking and warmth. Smaller rooms often relied on braziers, portable metal or clay bowls filled with glowing charcoal. These could be carried from place to place, set beneath tables, or placed near beds. In wealthier homes, slaves tended the braziers, ensuring they did not die down. In humbler spaces, families themselves took turns stirring coals, adding fuel, and guarding against accidents. Fire was both comfort and constant responsibility. Hypocaust systems, the pride of Roman engineering, consumed vast amounts of fuel. Beneath floors and within walls, hot air circulated, heated by furnaces that required endless feeding. Slaves labored near these furnaces, shoveling in wood throughout the day. The heat they produced was luxurious, spreading evenly through rooms, allowing baths to steam and villas to glow with warmth. But such systems were a privilege of the wealthy. For most Romans, the simple brazier, with its modest circle of coals, remained the heart of winter life. The struggle for fuel was not only physical, but also economic. In provinces where forests were abundant, wood was cheaper and easier to find. In regions stripped of trees by centuries of farming, such as around Rome itself, supplies became scarcer. Writers noted the difficulty of finding wood near the capital, the long distances from which it had to be brought, and the expense this created. Fuel shortages were not unknown, and when they occurred, the poor suffered most. Shivering in drafty apartments while the wealthy still kept their fires burning. Even in times of plenty, the use of fuel required care. Fires could spread quickly in crowded insulae, where wooden beams and narrow alleys made cities vulnerable. Regulations sometimes restricted the use of open flames, yet necessity overrode rules. Families lit braziers anyway, praying that embers would not spark disasters. The risk of fire haunted urban life, a reminder that warmth came at a cost. In villages and villas, the danger was less immediate, but accidents still occurred. A tipped brazier, an untended log, a child too near the flames. All could bring tragedy. Despite these risks, fire remained central to comfort. Roman writers often spoke of the joy of sitting by a fire in winter, of warming chilled hands, of gathering with friends in heated rooms. The crackle of burning wood, the glow of embers, the simple relief of warmth after cold winds. These experiences were universal. They remind us that Romans, though distant in time, shared the same basic pleasures and needs as we do today. Archaeological evidence reveals the scale of this dependence. Remains of charcoal deposits are found in Roman houses, showing where braziers once burned. Hypocaust systems, with their brick pillars and flues, stand silent but clear in ruined villas and bathhouses. Inscriptions mention the trade of fuel, while ancient texts record the cost of wood in urban markets. Together, these traces confirm that heating was not an afterthought, but a central concern of Roman daily life. For soldiers on campaign, the struggle for fuel was even more pressing. In winter camps along the frontiers, men scoured forests for wood, piling it high to feed campfires. Accounts describe soldiers riding home for warm clothing and complaining of freezing nights. Their fires not only cooked food, but also gave protection, for a camp without warmth was a camp vulnerable to sickness and despair. In this way, the Roman army's survival depended on the same simple truth as that of a farmer's family in Gaul or a shopkeeper in Rome. Without fuel, winter could not be endured. Thus, the story of Roman warmth is, in many ways, the story of wood and charcoal. It is a story of forests cut and managed, of merchants selling bundles in crowded markets, of families counting logs carefully to last the season. It is a story of innovation, where charcoal allowed portable heat, and of luxury, where hypocausts consumed mountains of wood to create comfort for the few. And above all, it is a story of survival, where every ember mattered and every fire meant the difference between cold and comfort that in the end, the struggle for fuel was as constant as the cycle of seasons. Each year, families gathered wood, stored it, and watched anxiously as piles dwindled through the cold months. Each year, merchants shipped logs to cities, slaves tended furnaces, and soldiers built campfires. Each year, the Romans reminded themselves of a truth that transcends centuries. Warmth must be earned, gathered, and guarded. Without it, life in winter was unthinkable. With it, homes became havens, and even stone walls could hold comfort. When one imagines the Roman winter, it is easy to think of villas with grand hypocaust systems or bathhouses filled with steam. Yet for the vast majority of Romans, warmth came not from elaborate engineering, but from something humbler: the brazier and the hearth. These simple devices, glowing with coals, were the true heart of Roman homes during the cold months. They were inexpensive compared to underfloor heating, portable, and versatile. Their warmth was modest, but in a world of stone walls and open courtyards, even modest heat could feel like luxury. To understand daily Roman life in winter, one must picture the glow of braziers, the crackle of small hearths, and the quiet gatherings of families around their flames. The brazier was a common sight across the empire, typically made of clay, bronze, or iron. It was essentially a shallow bowl or box designed to hold burning charcoal. Some were small enough to carry, while others stood on legs or pedestals. Archaeological discoveries reveal a wide variety of shapes: round, rectangular, even elaborately decorated with patterns cut into their sides. The principle, however, was always the same: to contain coals safely, allowing them to burn steadily and radiate heat into the room. For poorer families, the brazier was often the only source of warmth. In the crowded apartments of Rome, where space was limited and chimneys non-existent, braziers offered a way to cook food and heat rooms at the same time. Families gathered around them, placing their hands near the glow, warming bread on the edge, or simmering a pot above. The light they gave was dim, but in winter nights, even dim light was welcome. The brazier was a constant presence, its small flame transforming otherwise cold stone spaces into habitable rooms. Hearths, by contrast, were more permanent, built into kitchens or side rooms. They consisted of stone or brick enclosures where fires could be kept. Unlike the open flames of modern fireplaces, Roman hearths were often low, flat structures, designed as much for cooking as for heating. Wood was burned here more commonly than charcoal, for the open space allowed smoke to escape through small vents or simply drift upward. Kitchens filled with the scent of smoke, meals prepared slowly, and warmth radiated outward into adjacent spaces. The hearth was both a practical tool and a social center, for families often spent their time in the rooms where fires burned. The glow of these fires shaped the rhythm of daily life. In the mornings, coals were stirred to life, sending a thin stream of smoke curling upward. Bread was warmed or baked, water heated for washing, and the day began with the comfort of fire. At midday, meals simmered slowly on braziers or hearths, filling homes with the fragrance of stews, beans, or porridge. In the evenings, as the chill deepened, families drew closer. Cloaks were wrapped tightly, children huddled near the flames, and adults talked, sewed, or worked in the flickering light. Fire was never absent, for without it, rooms would fall silent and cold, but fires brought risks as well as warmth. Charcoal braziers in particular could be dangerous. Burning them in closed spaces released invisible fumes, which, in large enough amounts, could be fatal. Ancient writers noted these dangers, warning of households overcome by the very fires that were meant to protect them. Ventilation was limited in many Roman homes, and the balance between warmth and safety was delicate. Yet necessity left little choice, and so families used braziers carefully, cracking shutters, or relying on the natural drafts of stone buildings to carry away smoke. Despite these dangers, braziers were valued for their portability. Unlike a fixed hearth, they could be carried from one room to another, even brought into bedchambers at night. Wealthier households used ornate bronze braziers, decorated with animal motifs or geometric designs. Some were mounted on stands with wheels, so they could be rolled across floors. Such objects combined utility with display, showing both wealth and refinement. Yet even the plainest clay brazier, glowing softly in a small apartment, carried the same essential gift: warmth in winter. The hearth, meanwhile, held a deeper place in Roman domestic life. It was permanent, central, and symbolic of the household itself. Even in modest homes, the hearth was where meals were cooked and warmth was found. Archaeological remains of hearths, blackened with centuries of soot, reveal how central they were to daily living. Their ashes contain fragments of meals, charred seeds, and bones, silent witnesses to countless family gatherings. When one imagines a Roman winter evening, it is here, in the glow of a hearth, that the scene takes shape. The glow of fire was not only physical but emotional. It provided a sense of safety, of constancy, amid the long nights of cold and damp. The shadows it cast on walls, the steady crackle of burning wood, the warmth it spread through small rooms. These were experiences that transcended class and status. Whether in a grand villa or a cramped apartment, the sight of glowing coals carried the same meaning. Endurance against the season, comfort within stone walls. Fire also shaped the layout of time. In many households, the day ended not with clocks, but with the dimming of flames. Families lingered until the coals burned low, then stirred them one last time before sleep. In the morning, the first task was to revive them, blowing gently on embers, adding twigs, coaxing light from darkness. This daily cycle of tending fire gave rhythm to life, a reminder that survival depended on small acts repeated faithfully. The archaeological record confirms the ubiquity of these devices. Excavations of Roman houses reveal braziers of bronze and iron, hearths blackened with soot, and fragments of charcoal scattered in domestic layers. In Pompeii, remarkably preserved braziers stand where they were last used. Their shapes and sizes varied, but their function clear. These objects bring the reality of Roman heating vividly to life. Simple, widespread, and utterly essential. For soldiers and travelers, portable braziers were lifelines. In military camps, fires burned constantly, warming tents and cooking meals. Campaign accounts describe soldiers huddled around coals, sharing warmth after long marches. Merchants and travelers carried small braziers, lighting them at inns or even on the road. In these cases, fire was as much a companion as a tool, its glow a reminder of home amid the uncertainties of travel. Yet perhaps the most striking aspect of braziers and hearths is how they equalized Roman society. Hypocaust systems were rare and expensive, but coals in a brazier could be found in nearly every home. Fires burned for emperors and commoners alike, though on different scales. This shared dependence on the simplest form of heat connected all Romans. A reminder that beneath the grandeur of empire lay the same human need, warmth in winter die in the end. Braziers and hearths were more than objects. They were centers of life, anchors in the rhythm of daily existence. Their glow filled stone houses with light. Their heat turned cold rooms into homes, and their presence shaped the experiences of countless families across centuries. When we look back on the Roman winter, it is not only the grand villas or bathhouses that we should imagine, but also the small glow of coals in a brazier, the steady warmth of a hearth, and the quiet murmur of voices gathered close to the fire. Among the many achievements of Roman engineering, few reveal the empire's concern for daily comfort as clearly as the hypocaust. Where most Romans endured the winter with braziers and hearths, the wealthiest enjoyed a different experience, rooms warmed not from above, but from below. To step barefoot across a heated floor in the midst of winter was a sensation almost magical in its time. It required skill, labor, and resources, but it transformed certain Roman homes and bathhouses into havens of steady warmth. The hypocaust system worked on a simple principle, yet its construction was ingenious. A furnace, or prefurnium, was built outside the main living spaces. Slaves fed this furnace constantly with wood, keeping a steady fire burning. The heat and smoke from this fire were directed into channels beneath the floors, which were raised on stacks of bricks or stone pillars known as pili. The hot air circulated through these spaces, warming the floors above. In some designs, hollow tiles carried the heat upward into the walls, spreading warmth even further. The result was a room that remained pleasantly warm without the smoke and flicker of open flames. For the wealthy who could afford it, the hypocaust was more than convenience. It was a mark of status. To invite guests into a villa where the floors themselves gave warmth was to display mastery of both nature and resources. Guests would remove their sandals, feeling the heat rise gently through stone and tile. In the cold months, such an experience distinguished the elite from the common. While poor families huddled around braziers, the privileged dined, bathed, and slept in rooms where the very architecture served as a cloak against the cold. Bathhouses became the most famous use of the hypocaust. Public baths, present in nearly every Roman town, required constant heat to warm their caldaria, the hot rooms where citizens bathed and sweated. Hypocausts made this possible. Furnaces burned endlessly, tended by slaves who worked in shifts, feeding them with logs to keep the fires steady. The floors of hot rooms grew so warm that bathers wore sandals to avoid burning their feet. Steam rose, mixing with warmth, creating the famous Roman baths that offered not only cleanliness but also comfort and social life during the winter in villas. Hypocausts were often reserved for dining halls, private baths, or bedrooms. They were expensive to build and maintain, requiring both skilled labor and constant fuel. The floors had to be strong enough to hold weight while leaving space for air to circulate. The furnace itself required careful placement, usually along an outer wall, where slaves could feed it without disturbing the household. The labor behind the luxury was immense. Fires tended day and night, ash removed, logs carried, and smoke managed. The warmth enjoyed above rested upon the toil of many below. The presence of hypocausts varied across the empire. In colder provinces, such as Britain and northern Gaul, they were more common in villas, providing much-needed relief from harsher winters. In the Mediterranean heartlands, where winters were milder, they appeared mainly in baths or in the grandest houses. Archaeological remains across Europe show their spread. Rows of brick pillars still stand in ruined villas, silent testimony to the system that once filled those spaces with warmth. To walk among these remains today is to glimpse the hidden infrastructure of Roman life. The unseen chambers that carried fire beneath the feet of their owners. Yet even for those who possessed hypocausts, warmth was not without cost. The furnaces consumed enormous amounts of wood. Forests near towns and villas were cut steadily to feed the fires of baths and homes. This constant demand for fuel created economic pressures, raising the price of wood and forcing supply networks to stretch ever farther. In cities like Rome, the scale was staggering. Public baths serving thousands of citizens required endless streams of fuel, hauled in by carts and boats. The luxury of heated floors was, in truth, sustained by entire systems of labor, trade, and exploitation of resources. For most Romans, the hypocaust remained an object of wonder rather than experience. Visitors to a wealthy villa might marvel at its warmth, but they returned to their own colder homes. Writers of the time noted the contrast. Philosophers sometimes even criticized the comfort, suggesting it made people soft, less prepared for the hardships of life. Others praised it as a triumph of Roman ingenuity, proof that the empire could bend nature to its will. Both views reveal the same truth. The hypocaust was exceptional, not ordinary. It was a symbol of privilege, innovation, and the divide between rich and poor. Despite this divide, the idea of heated spaces spread slowly beyond Rome. Later societies, inspired by Roman models, adopted underfloor heating in their own ways. The legacy of the hypocaust continued long after the empire itself declined, influencing medieval bathhouses in the Islamic world and, centuries later, European approaches to heating. The principle of warming floors with hidden fires proved enduring, a reminder of how Roman solutions outlived Roman power. Archaeological studies have revealed the intricacy of these systems. At sites like Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Bath in Britain, the remains of hypocausts can be seen clearly: raised floors supported by pillars, channels cut into walls, and furnaces opening into carefully designed spaces. Ash deposits, soot-stained tiles, and collapsed flues all tell the story of how these systems function daily. They remind us that beneath the elegance of Roman architecture lay the practical reality of smoke, labor, and constant burning. Imagining the experience of a hypocaust, one must picture the sensory world it created. The floors warm underfoot, the air steady and comfortable, the absence of smoke within the room. Guests reclining on couches could talk and dine without shivering. Children could play indoors without needing heavy cloaks. Elders could rest more easily, free from the ache of damp cold. The glow of oil lamps reflected on tiles warmed from beneath, giving rooms a comfort unknown to most of the empire. It was luxury in its truest sense, not necessary for survival, but transformative for those who had it. Yet the hypocaust also reveals the contrasts of Roman life. For every villa with heated floors, there were countless insulae where families wrapped themselves in blankets against the cold. For every bathhouse steaming with warmth, there were fields where peasants cut wood in frost to feed the fires. The comfort of the few rested on the labor of the many, as it so often did in Rome. In this sense, the hypocaust was not only a marvel of engineering, but also a symbol of inequality, of how warmth itself could be divided by wealth and status. Still, it remains one of the clearest expressions of Roman ingenuity. To channel fire beneath the floor, to create warmth without flame or smoke in the room, was a leap of imagination that few other ancient societies achieved. It speaks to the Roman desire for control, for order, for mastery over the environment. In the cold months, when winds swept across the empire, the hypocaust stood as proof that Roman architecture was not only about grandeur, but also about comfort. Thus, the story of the hypocaust is the story of winter luxury. It is the story of furnaces roaring in hidden chambers, of slaves laboring in heat while their masters reclined in warmth. It is the story of villas that glowed against frost, of baths that steamed in snow, of an empire that sought not only to endure winter, but to conquer it. In the quiet warmth beneath the floor, we glimpse both the brilliance and the contradictions of Roman life. The Romans, though known for their roads, aqueducts, and grand temples, lived most of their days in the same quiet struggle that all humans face when winter comes, keeping their bodies warm. Fires could heat a room. Hypocausts could transform villas and baths. But survival in the cold also depended on the simplest layer of defense: clothing, blankets, and the way people wrapped themselves against the chill. The story of warmth in Rome is not only about engineering and architecture. It is also about cloaks pulled tightly around shoulders, wool spun by patient hands, and families huddled beneath heavy coverings when frost lay on the ground. Wool was the foundation of Roman winter clothing. Sheep were common across the empire, and their fleeces provided the raw material for tunics, cloaks, and blankets. Wool was practical. It trapped heat, resisted dampness, and was readily available. Women spun it into yarn on spindles, then wove it on looms into cloth. This cloth was dyed, sometimes bright, sometimes simple, depending on wealth. The resulting garments were layered over the body, forming barriers against the cold winds that swept through streets and fields. The Roman tunic, the basic garment worn by men and women alike, was usually made of wool. In winter, people wore thicker tunics or layered more than one. Over these came the cloak, paenula or sagum, heavy garments draped over the shoulders, fastened with brooches or clasps. The paenula was a large, hooded cloak, excellent for keeping out rain and wind, while the sagum was simpler, a rectangle of wool wrapped tightly around the body. Soldiers on the frontiers depended heavily on such cloaks. Their warmth often the difference between endurance and misery for wealthier citizens. Cloaks could be finely woven, dyed in expensive colors, or trimmed with decorative borders. For the poor, they were plain, coarse, and often patched. Yet whether fine or simple, the function remained the same: to shield the body from the bite of winter. Written sources mention men and women wearing multiple cloaks at once, layering them for warmth. The image of a Roman citizen, wrapped heavily in wool, moving briskly through cold streets, is far closer to reality than the airy robes of marble statues. Hats and coverings for the head were less common in Roman fashion. Yet in the coldest regions, people improvised. Hoods attached to cloaks or caps made of wool or felt were worn, especially in the provinces. Gloves and mittens are rarely mentioned, but wrappings for hands and feet, woolen bands or leather coverings, were certainly used. Soldiers in particular needed such protection, for their duties often kept them exposed for long hours. Archaeological finds of footwear from Roman forts show shoes lined with wool or stuffed with straw, designed to insulate against frost. Blankets and bedding played just as important a role indoors. Roman homes were built of stone, which held cold as much as heat. At night, when fires died down, warmth came from layers of coverings. Blankets, woven of thick wool, were spread over wooden or stone beds. Furs, when available, added further insulation. Wealthy households might have large, finely woven coverlets, embroidered or dyed, while poorer families relied on rougher cloths. In both cases, the act of pulling a blanket over oneself was an essential gesture of comfort in winter. Families often shared bedding, children sleeping beside parents, bodies providing warmth to one another in the chill of night. Writers of the time sometimes complained of cold even within the city of Rome. The poet Martial joked about people shivering in their cloaks, while others described the damp, penetrating chill of Roman winters. Soldiers' letters from northern provinces begged for warm cloaks, socks, and bedding to be sent from home. These voices remind us that winter was felt keenly across the empire, and clothing was as vital as any fire. Without it, even the brightest hearth could not keep out the cold entirely. The production of clothing itself was a year-round task, but its importance grew in winter. Women spun and wove constantly, creating new garments or repairing old ones. Patching cloaks, darning socks, and mending tunics were routine household labors. Children wore hand-me-downs, cloaks cut down from older siblings. Nothing was wasted. Even worn-out garments were repurposed into bedding or wrappings. The economy of warmth was frugal, practical, and unending. Footwear reveals much about this battle against the cold. Roman sandals, so often imagined as the universal footwear of the empire, were impractical in winter. Soldiers and civilians alike used sturdier shoes, closed leather boots, sometimes nailed for grip, sometimes lined with wool. In colder provinces, fur-lined boots appear in the archaeological record, proof that Romans adapted their attire to local climates. Wrappings of cloth around legs and feet, secured with leather straps, served as makeshift socks, keeping toes from freezing. Such simple measures, though rarely celebrated, were vital in everyday survival. Even indoors, clothing and blankets were essential. Fires could heat a room, but stone walls and open courtyards made Roman houses drafty. People often kept cloaks on inside, wrapping themselves tightly as they worked, ate, or talked. In wealthier villas with hypocausts, the difference was striking: rooms warm enough for lighter dress, even in winter. Yet such comfort was rare. For most, the winter wardrobe remained heavy and layered until the first warmth of spring returned. The symbolism of clothing also carried weight. A heavy woolen cloak was not only practical, but a visible sign of preparation, of dignity and hardship. Soldiers' cloaks in particular became emblematic of endurance. In literature, To describe a man wrapped in his sagum was to evoke resilience, the quiet strength of one who endured cold without complaint. Cloaks passed from fathers to sons, treasured for their utility as much as for their sentiment. The threads of warmth carried with them the threads of memory and identity. Archaeological evidence confirms these practices. Preserved textiles from Roman sites, though rare, show the weave of woolen fabrics, dense and durable. Footwear from forts along the Rhine and Hadrian's Wall reveals adaptations for cold, including nailed soles for icy ground and linings for warmth. Tools of spinning and weaving, spindles, loom weights, needles, appear in abundance, testimony to the endless labor of textile production. These objects, ordinary yet vital, tell us that clothing and blankets were not luxuries, but the very fabric of survival. When imagining Roman winter life, one must picture not only fires and hypocausts, but also the personal cocoon of wool and fur. Men walking through forums with cloaks pulled tight, women wrapping children in blankets, soldiers huddled in tents beneath layered coverings. All relied on the same principle: the body's own heat, trapped and preserved by cloth. Fires warmed spaces, but garments warmed people. It was in these small, humble acts, pulling on a cloak, tucking in a blanket, wrapping straw in shoes, that survival was secured. Thus, the story of Roman warmth is also the story of clothing and bedding. It is the story of sheep sheared in summer, of wool spun through long hours, of cloaks clasped with bronze pins, of furs laid over beds. It is the story of ordinary people enduring extraordinary cold with the simplest of tools: fabric, patience, and resilience. In these acts, quiet and unrecorded, lies the true battle against winter, not waged with marble and stone, but with threads and cloth pulled close against the night. The story of Roman warmth in winter cannot be told without pausing in the kitchen. While hypocausts were the privilege of the wealthy and braziers offered small circles of heat, it was the cooking fire that formed the everyday center of household life. Here, where flames glowed beneath pots and smoke curled upward through vents or open spaces, warmth and sustenance were created together. Kitchens, whether grand or humble, were places where fire was most constant, and where the comfort of hot food carried families through the coldest months that in wealthy villas. Kitchens were separate rooms built with stone hearths, ovens, and storage spaces for fuel. Fires burned here throughout the day, tended by slaves who cooked meals and managed supplies. In poorer homes, kitchens were smaller, often little more than a corner with a brazier or a shallow hearth. Yet in both cases, the heat of cooking filled the air, spreading through nearby rooms, offering warmth beyond nourishment. In the winter, the kitchen became the natural gathering place, its flames serving both pot and person. Cooking fires were typically fueled with wood or charcoal. Wood gave strong flames for boiling and roasting, while charcoal provided steady heat for simmering. Archaeological finds of Roman kitchens reveal clay ovens, sometimes dome-shaped, used for baking bread and roasting meats. Flat stones blackened by centuries of soot tell of countless fires lit and relit. Even the ashes, carefully swept and reused, remind us that every scrap of fuel was valuable. Kitchens were places of transformation, where raw materials became meals and cold air became warm with the scent of cooking. The warmth of food itself was as vital as the flames that produced it. In winter, when bodies ached from cold, hot meals were not luxuries but necessities. Stews made from beans, lentils, and vegetables simmered slowly, releasing steam that both nourished and warmed. Bread fresh from the oven carried heat into hands and mouths. Warm drinks, from simple broths to spiced wines, gave comfort against frost. Even in the humblest households, a bowl of hot porridge could turn a bleak evening into something bearable. The act of eating hot food was an act of defense against the season. The kitchen was also a space of constant labor. Women, slaves, or hired cooks spent hours tending fires, stirring pots, baking loaves. In winter, this work was particularly demanding, for fuel had to be managed carefully, meals stretched to last, and fires maintained even when winds blew cold through open courtyards. Smoke filled the air, stinging eyes and lungs. Yet people persisted, for without the kitchen, households could not endure. The very difficulty of this labor reveals how central it was. To cook was to provide not only nourishment, but also warmth, the two intertwined in daily survival. Meals in winter were often hearty and practical. In wealthier homes, large roasts and spiced dishes filled tables, the fires of kitchens working constantly to prepare them. In poorer spaces, soups and porridges dominated, easy to cook over small braziers, filling and warming. Archaeological evidence from Roman sites shows carbonized grains, beans, and fruits, simple foods that, when cooked, became the backbone of winter sustenance. Even fish and meat, when available, were boiled or roasted over flames, their warmth carrying into the bodies of those who ate them. Bread was central to this cycle of warmth. Baked in communal ovens in towns or in small clay ovens at villas, bread carried not only calories but also comfort. The heat of ovens spread into surrounding rooms, and the smell of fresh loaves promised relief. Bakeries in Roman cities worked constantly, their fires glowing through the night. For many, the warmth of bread was as much emotional as physical, a daily reminder that life continued despite the cold. The social role of kitchens was just as important as their practical one. Families gathered there not only to eat, but to talk, to work, to share time near the fire. In large villas, slaves clustered in kitchens for warmth while working. In small apartments, entire families lingered in the corner where braziers glowed. Stories were told, songs sung, and tasks like spinning wool or repairing clothes carried out by the glow of flames. The kitchen was more than a place of cooking. It was a hearth of the household in the truest sense, where life in winter was concentrated. For soldiers on campaign, the camp kitchen carried the same meaning. Fires were lit in pits or simple hearths, meals boiled in pots, and men gathered around for warmth and camaraderie. Letters from soldiers mentioned the longing for warm food, for cloaks, for fires that could keep frost at bay. In these temporary kitchens, as in permanent ones, the act of cooking bound people together, transforming cold nights into shared endurance. Even the dangers of kitchens reveal their importance. Fires sometimes spread, especially in crowded insulae where braziers tipped easily. Smoke inhalation was a constant risk as ventilation was poor. Yet these dangers were accepted, for kitchens could not be abandoned. The risk of fire was balanced against the certainty of cold and hunger. Archaeological layers of ash, charred walls, and burnt beams tell the story of these accidents, but also of resilience, for kitchens were rebuilt, fires relit, and meals cooked again. The sensory world of the Roman kitchen must also be imagined. The crackle of logs, the hiss of boiling pots, the warm scent of bread, the glow of flames on stone walls, all created an atmosphere both comforting and lively. Children sat close, warming hands and feet. Adults worked steadily, their movements shaped by long practice. Outside, frost covered the land, but inside, the kitchen glowed with light, sound, and warmth. This contrast defined winter survival. The world was harsh, but within, fire made life possible. Archaeological evidence of Roman kitchens deepens this picture. In Pompeii and Herculaneum, preserved kitchens reveal hearths blackened with soot, ovens intact, and braziers still in place. Carbonized remains of meals, bread loaves, figs, grains, show what people ate and how they cooked. Tools such as pots, pans, and ladles have been found, their shapes still familiar today. These remains remind us that kitchens were not abstract spaces, but real, daily centers of life, where families and servants worked tirelessly to create warmth and sustenance. The symbolism of the kitchen was powerful as well. It was where the household gathered, where the fire was constant, and where survival was made tangible through meals. In literature, the kitchen was sometimes dismissed as humble compared to the grandeur of dining halls, but in reality, it was indispensable. A fine banquet could not exist without the steady labor of the kitchen. A family could not endure winter without its fire. The warmth of food was as much a foundation of Roman life as roads or aqueducts. Thus, in the Roman struggle against winter, kitchens played a role both practical and profound. They were the beating heart of households, the source of warmth and sustenance, the place where fire burned steadily while winds howled outside. They remind us that survival was not only about great engineering feats, but also about daily labor, repeated endlessly, shaping lives in quiet resilience. To imagine a Roman winter without kitchens is to imagine it without warmth, without the glow of fire, without the comfort of food. When winter winds swept through Roman cities and villages, not every household could rely on hypocausts, braziers, or plentiful firewood. Yet Romans had another refuge, the thermae, the public baths. These complexes, often among the grandest buildings of their time, offered warmth, steam, and a social center for daily life. For the price of a small fee, or sometimes none at all, citizens could step from cold streets into spaces filled with glowing fires, heated floors, and water that steamed gently in the winter air. In a world where private heating was limited, the baths were a shared answer to the question of warmth. The design of Roman baths was remarkable. Furnaces burned day and night, feeding hypocausts that warmed floors and walls. Hot water was piped into pools, while separate rooms offered different degrees of heat. The frigidarium for cold plunges, the tepidarium for moderate warmth, and the caldarium for intense heat and steam. To step into a caldarium in midwinter was to be enveloped in warmth so complete that one could forget the chill outside. Steam clung to skin, heat seeped into bones, and the body revived. Baths were not only for the wealthy. They were built in towns across the empire, funded by emperors, magistrates, or local elites. Entry fees were modest, ensuring access for ordinary people. For many who lived in cramped, unheated apartments, the baths were the only reliable warmth of winter. To spend an hour in the steamy rooms was to experience relief from shivering nights and drafty homes. In this way, the baths served both physical and social needs, becoming indispensable parts of urban life. The labor behind this warmth was immense. Slaves tended the furnaces, hauling wood and shoveling ash, ensuring the fires never went out. Vast amounts of fuel were consumed daily. Archaeological studies suggest that large bath complexes required tons of wood each week, supplied by organized networks of merchants and laborers. The cost was high, but the value to the community immense. The steady warmth of the baths was not magic, but the result of constant human effort, hidden behind the walls. The baths also shaped the rhythm of daily life. In winter, visits became more frequent, as people sought not only cleanliness but also comfort. Men and women gathered in their separate sections, warming themselves in steam, exercising in heated rooms, and reclining in spaces where oil lamps glowed against marble walls. Conversations filled the air, news exchanged, business discussed, friendships renewed. The baths were not silent sanctuaries, but lively centers, where warmth of body combined with warmth of community. For the poor, the baths were a gift. In apartments where braziers smoked and blankets were thin, a visit to the baths offered a respite. Even if only for a short time, one could be clean, warm, and at ease. Writers sometimes mocked those who lingered too long in the baths, treating them as luxury seekers. Yet for many, this lingering was a rare chance to feel truly comfortable. To emerge from the caldarium into the chill of evening was to carry a glow that lasted for hours. The sensory world of the baths was unlike any other. One entered from cold streets into warm air scented with steam and oils. The sound of water splashing, the echo of voices against stone, the crackle of fires hidden in furnaces, all blended together. Marble floors, heated from below, spread comfort through bare feet. Pools reflected lamplight, steam blurred vision, and the body relaxed in ways impossible elsewhere. For Romans, especially in winter, this was more than bathing. It was renewal. Baths also provided services that added to their role as refuges. Vendors sold food and drink outside, allowing visitors to prolong their stay. Masseurs and barbers worked within, offering grooming and relaxation. Libraries and gardens often adjoined the complexes, giving space for reading or strolling once warmed. Thus, the baths became multifunctional, places of hygiene, warmth, leisure, and social connection. In winter, they were especially vital, drawing people out of cold homes into shared spaces of comfort. Archaeological remains illustrate the scale of this achievement. In places like Rome, Bath in Britain, or Trier in Germany, ruins of vast bath complexes still stand. Soaring arches, rows of hypocaust pillars, channels for water and heat. These silent stones once echoed with voices, steam, and laughter. The remains of furnaces and storage pits for fuel testify to the scale of resources consumed. They remind us that Roman warmth was not confined to private villas but extended to public life, shared by citizens regardless of wealth. Yet the baths also revealed inequalities. While public baths welcomed many, not all had equal access. In some regions, rural families lived far from towns and could not visit regularly. In others, entry fees, though modest, still placed them beyond the reach of the poorest. Wealthier citizens could also build private bathhouses within their villas, enjoying the luxury without sharing. Thus, while baths symbolized communal warmth, they also reflected the broader social divides of Roman life. Writers of the time often praised the baths. Seneca, though critical of excess, acknowledged their role in daily routines. Martial joked about the characters one might meet there. Others described the relief of steam on cold bodies, the joy of warm water in winter. These voices, scattered across centuries, confirm that the baths were more than architecture. They were living, breathing centers of experience. The bath's importance extended even to soldiers. Frontier forts sometimes had small bathhouses, offering warmth to men stationed in freezing provinces. These facilities, though modest compared to Rome's grand complexes, still relied on hypocausts and furnaces. For soldiers enduring long winters, such baths were invaluable, giving both hygiene and comfort. The presence of these structures on the edges of empires shows how deeply the Romans valued warmth and bathing, even in the harshest climates. Ultimately, the public baths embodied the Roman answer to winter on a communal scale. They were places where fire, water, and architecture combined to create environments of steady warmth. They gave relief to the poor, leisure to the wealthy, and connection to all. They consumed vast resources, demanded constant labor, and symbolized both generosity and inequality. Yet above all, they reveal that the Romans did not simply endure winter. They created spaces where it could be forgotten, if only for a while. When we picture a Roman winter, we must imagine not only families huddled by braziers, but also crowds stepping into steaming rooms, their bodies glowing, their voices echoing in marble halls. We must see the contrast between frost outside and warmth within, between shivering streets and caldaria filled with mist. In these spaces, the empire's mastery of fire and water became most visible. The baths remind us that Roman life, even in its harshest season, was shaped not only by survival, but by the pursuit of comfort, shared in the company of others. When the sun dipped early and the air turned sharp with cold, the Roman household gathered inward. Winter evenings, stretching long into the night, became times of closeness. Unlike summer, when daily life spilled into courtyards, gardens, and streets, winter forced families to retreat into the warmth of their homes, no matter how modest or grand. Fires glowed in braziers, lamps flickered against stone walls, and the sound of quiet talk, the clatter of tools, and the steady rhythm of weaving or mending filled the hours. In these moments, warmth was not only a matter of fuel and clothing, but of companionship and the comfort of being together. The Roman long evening began with the tending of fires. Coals were stirred, new fuel added, and braziers or hearths set glowing. The work of keeping fire alive was constant, and it often fell to children or slaves to ensure that flames never died. The glow of embers provided light as well as warmth, their red reflections dancing across bronze pots and clay vessels. Alongside the fires, oil lamps were lit, their small flames fed by olive oil, their smoke rising gently to the rafters. In wealthier homes, lamps of bronze or terracotta might have been finely decorated, but their humble glow was the same as in poorer households. Together, fire and lamp transformed the early dark of winter into a softer world of light and shadow. Meals were central to these evenings. Families ate hot stews, porridge, bread fresh from ovens, or roasted vegetables, their warmth spreading through the body and soul alike. In wealthy homes, dinners could be elaborate, served in heated dining rooms where couches surrounded low tables. In humbler apartments, families sat close together, bowls in hand, the steam from food mingling with the glow of coals. The act of sharing food, of talking while eating, filled the evening with rhythm and routine. Even the simplest meal became a ritual of warmth, tying family and household together. After meals, work resumed, though of a quieter kind. Women often spun wool or wove cloth, their looms standing near the fires where light and heat were strongest. The sound of looms creaking and threads snapping was common in Roman homes, especially in the long nights of winter. Men repaired tools, sharpened knives, or checked nets and ropes. Children played with carved toys, small wooden animals, or knucklebones tossed across the floor. Even slaves, though burdened with labor, shared in the glow of the fires as they carried out evening tasks. Each person had work to do, yet all were bound by the same warmth, the same walls, the same night. Storytelling often filled the hours after work. Elders recalled tales of ancestors, battles, or journeys across the seas. Poets and writers, in the homes of the educated, might read aloud from scrolls, their voices echoing in lamplight. In humbler households, stories were simpler. Fables, jokes, or personal memories passed from one generation to the next. Children listened with wide eyes, learning family histories and absorbing lessons hidden in tales. The stories themselves were less important than the act of telling them, for in this exchange, families drew closer and the long winter night seemed shorter. Music added another layer of comfort. Simple flutes, lyres, or drums could be played by the fireside, their sounds blending with the crackle of flames. Songs were sung, sometimes playful, sometimes solemn, often familiar to everyone present. Music turned ordinary evenings into gatherings of spirit, lifting hearts against the weight of cold and darkness. The repetition of melodies linked households across time, for songs were carried from parents to children, their notes surviving winters for generations. In wealthier villas, evenings might also include games. Board games like Nefataful or dice games brought laughter and competition into the room. Guests might recline together, warmed by hypocaust floors, while servants brought wine, fruit, or nuts. Discussions of philosophy or politics could continue late into the night, the comfort of heated rooms allowing conversation to flourish. These gatherings remind us that winter was not only endured but enjoyed by those with means, turning cold months into times of leisure and reflection. Yet for most Romans, evenings were humbler. In small apartments, families huddled close, wrapped in blankets, with only a single brazier for heat. Their togetherness was their greatest comfort. The closeness of bodies, the shared labor of keeping fires alive, the simple act of sitting side by side, all turned hardship into companionship. In this way, winter strengthened bonds, for survival depended as much on unity as on fuel. Sleep came early for many, shaped by the darkness. Beds of wood or stone were covered with straw mattresses, layered with blankets and furs. Families often slept together, especially children beside parents, to share body heat. Fires might be allowed to burn low, leaving only embers to be revived in the morning. In the silence of night, the faint glow of coals lit the room, a quiet promise that warmth would return with dawn. The archaeological record hints at these evenings. Lamps, preserved in countless forms, show the centrality of light. Toys carved from wood or bone, loom weights, and spindle whorls tell of children's play and women's weaving. Dice, gaming boards, and musical instruments confirm the role of leisure. Inscriptions and writings add further detail, describing both grand banquets and simple family meals. Together, they reveal the reality of winter evenings, not silent, not empty, but filled with activity, companionship, and quiet warmth. In literature, too, glimpses of these evenings appear. Poets speak of winter lamps burning late, of families gathered by fires, of the relief of hot meals. Soldiers write home of the longing for warmth and the joy of company. Philosophers reflect on the simple pleasures of shared meals and quiet nights. These voices confirm that winter, though harsh, was also a time of closeness, of reflection, of togetherness. The contrast between wealthy and poor was always present. Yet the core experience of winter evenings was shared, whether in marble villas with hypocaust floors or in cramped insulae with thin blankets. The rhythm of family life carried on. Fires burned, meals were eaten, stories told, songs sung, and sleep sought under blankets. The details differed, but the essence was the same: warmth, companionship, and the quiet endurance of night. Thus, Roman winter evenings reveal another side of the empire. Beyond roads and armies, beyond emperors and monuments, life was lived in small rooms, by flickering light, among families who faced the same chill winds as we do today. Their solutions, fires, clothing, blankets, and togetherness, were simple, yet powerful. In the glow of their evenings, we glimpsed not only survival, but also the enduring human desire for comfort, companionship, and peace in the midst of winter's long embrace. When speaking of Roman winters, we often imagine villas, towns, and the daily comforts of families gathered around braziers. Yet much of the empire's story was written not within stone walls, but along its borders, where soldiers stood guard against threats and endured the harshest conditions of all. For them, winter was not only a season, but an enemy, an adversary as relentless as any barbarian army. Understanding how Roman soldiers survived the cold reveals not only their resilience, but also the immense logistical efforts of the empire that sustained them. The Roman frontiers stretched across diverse climates. In Britain, soldiers faced damp winds, icy rain, and snow that blanketed Hadrian's Wall. Along the Rhine and Danube, winter locked rivers in ice, forests in frost, and fields in silence. In the Alps, mountain passes were treacherous with snow, while in the eastern provinces, highlands could grow bitterly cold despite the sun. To be a Roman soldier meant being prepared not only for battle, but also for the elements, and nowhere was this clearer than in winter. Military forts were built with cold in mind, though never perfectly insulated. Barracks were long, narrow buildings of stone or timber, divided into rooms for Cantaburnia, groups of 8 soldiers. Each room housed men closely packed, their body heat contributing to warmth. Hearths or braziers provided additional heat, though fuel was precious and often scarce. Archaeological remains of such barracks show hearths in corners, ash layers, and traces of charcoal, evidence of fires lit through countless winters. The walls, however, were thin, the roofs drafty, and the floors damp. Soldiers lived in conditions far colder than civilians in towns. Clothing was a soldier's first defense. The woolen sagum, a heavy cloak, was standard issue for armies stationed in cold provinces. Soldiers wrapped themselves tightly in these cloaks, often layering them over tunics and leggings. Archaeological finds of shoes from forts, such as Vindolanda, reveal footwear lined with wool or stuffed with straw, their soles studded with iron nails for grip on icy ground. Written records confirm that soldiers frequently requested extra clothing from home: socks, cloaks, and undergarments sent by families or purchased locally. These details remind us that Roman discipline coexisted with very human discomfort. Fuel, as in civilian life, was critical. Soldiers cut wood from surrounding forests, stacking it in large piles to dry. The army organized this work systematically, sending men to gather and transport logs. In colder provinces, vast amounts were needed to heat not only barracks but also bathhouses, which forts often contained. These bathhouses, though smaller than urban thermae, were vital in winter, providing soldiers with warmth, cleanliness, and morale. To step into a heated caldarium after days in icy winds was a relief almost beyond words. Yet this luxury was sustained only by relentless labor. Slaves, auxiliaries, or soldiers themselves feeding furnaces day and night. Daily routines in winter reflected the season's demands. Drills and patrols continued, but with adaptations. Snow and mud slowed marches, icy winds stiffened limbs, and equipment grew heavy with damp. Fires were lit along watchtowers and gates, their smoke rising into frozen skies. Guards stood wrapped in cloaks, shifting from foot to keep blood flowing. In barracks, men sharpened weapons, repaired clothing, or simply sat close to braziers, speaking quietly as the cold pressed against stone walls. Letters and tablets from forts speak of these realities: requests for supplies, complaints about weather, and notes of gratitude for gifts of clothing. The psychological battle against winter was as real as the physical one. Isolation along the frontiers, combined with long nights and harsh weather, tested morale. The companionship of fellow soldiers became essential. Around fires, stories were told, dice games played, songs sung. Shared hardship built bonds, transforming men from strangers into brothers. This camaraderie was as important for survival as any cloak or brazier, for loneliness could weigh as heavily as frost. Logistics reveal the empire's reach. Supplying thousands of soldiers with food, clothing, and fuel through winter was an immense task. Grain was shipped from fertile regions, transported by river and road, and stored in granaries with raised floors to keep it dry. Cloaks and blankets were manufactured in workshops and distributed by the state. Wood was gathered locally, but in some regions, shortages forced long supply chains. These efforts show the organizational strength of Rome, an empire capable of sustaining armies not only in battle, but also in the bitter cold of foreign winters. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts vividly. At Vindolanda in Britain, wooden writing tablets preserved in damp soil record soldiers asking for socks, sandals, and cloaks. Excavations at forts reveal thick layers of ash from fires, remains of hypocaust systems in bathhouses, and shoes adapted for cold. Bones of animals consumed in winter meals, alongside tools and personal items, paint a picture of life lived in difficult conditions but sustained by careful planning. These discoveries bring the soldiers' winter into sharp focus, showing both hardship and resilience. Even with preparation, winters could be deadly. Frostbite, illness, and exhaustion claimed lives. Armies caught in campaigns during harsh winters often suffered greatly. Historical records describe legions struggling through snow, supply lines failing, and men succumbing to cold as much as to enemy swords. Commanders knew that timing campaigns with the seasons was essential, for winter was a foe no strategy could fully defeat. Yet even so, the empire held its borders year after year. Through the endurance of soldiers who faced not only human enemies but the relentless bite of cold. The image of the Roman soldier is often one of discipline, armor, and battle. Yet in winter, that image must be expanded. A man wrapped tightly in a woolen cloak, standing guard as icy wind whips across a frontier wall. A group of soldiers crouched around a brazier, their breath misting as they share bread and talk quietly. A barracks filled with the smell of smoke and damp wool, with laughter and complaints mingling in the air. These moments, humble yet profound, reveal the true resilience of the Roman army. In the end, the story of Roman winters on the frontiers is one of endurance. Fires, cloaks, and companionship formed the triad of survival. Fuel and clothing were vital, but so too was the bond of men who faced the season together. The empire's might rested not only on legions in formation, but also on these small, human acts: lighting fires, sharing cloaks, lifting spirits. The harshest winters could not break the Roman army, for it endured not only through strength of arms, but through strength of community. Thus, when we think of Roman winters, we must look beyond villas and baths to the lonely walls of the frontiers. There, in barracks and watchtowers, soldiers endured the empire's coldest nights. Their survival was not glorious, but it was essential, for without their watchful endurance, the empire itself would have faltered. In their fires, their cloaks, and their shared resilience, we find the truest story of Roman warmth against winter. As we leave behind the Roman winter, we see how much more it was than just a season. It was a test of preparation, of patience, and of community. Fires in kitchens, glowing braziers in small rooms, hypocausts beneath the villas of the wealthy, and the great steam of public baths all tell us that warmth was not taken for granted but built carefully. Every day that we saw how families wrapped themselves in cloaks and blankets, how children gathered close to parents near a brazier, how soldiers on the frontier endured bitter winds with sagums drawn tight around their shoulders. We saw the daily labor of cutting wood, spinning wool, baking bread, and tending fires. And we saw how, in every corner of the empire, Romans found ways to push back against the cold with ingenuity and resilience. For the rich, warmth could be a luxury: heated floors, steaming baths, elaborate feasts, and comfort. For the poor, it was often a matter of endurance: smoke-filled rooms, patched cloaks, and thin blankets. Yet in both cases, the need was the same, and so was the answer: fire, fabric, food, and togetherness. Roman winters remind us that beneath the grandeur of empire lay the same human concerns we know today. The chill of stone walls, the relief of a hot meal, the comfort of blankets pulled tight at night. These are experiences that connect us across centuries. The Romans built monuments and roads, but they also sat quietly by firesides, telling stories while winds howled outside. And now, as our own evening draws to a close, let the memory of their quiet endurance settle like a warm cloak around you. Picture the glow of a brazier in a darkened room, the hush of a sleeping household, the steady warmth of coals lasting until dawn. In that image, the cold fades and only rest remains. Thank you for listening to Boring History for Sleep. If you enjoyed this calm journey into the Roman winter, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can return for more gentle stories of the past. Good night.